With the new armor changes, I have seen a ton of videos saying either light fighter meta is dead, or armor changes basically do nothing, or heavy fighters are completely broken now, and all of these statements are wrong. So why? Let me explain. With the new armor system, every fighter now has a second HP pool, the armor itself. This armor comes with a threshold, meaning you need a certain amount of alpha damage per shot to even penetrate the armor and deal damage to the ship's normal HP. If your weapon doesn't meet that threshold, you deal 0 damage to the hull and 0 damage to the armor. But once you do penetrate, you damage both the armor and the normal HP at the same time. The armor with that gets weaker over time, and with that, the threshold gets lower. Which means basically weapons that couldn't deal damage before can suddenly start dealing damage later in the fight when the armor got weakened first. There are 2 separate thresholds for laser weapons and also for physical weapons. So ships can be sometimes better armored against laser weapons than against physical weapons and the other way around. But any damage, so laser or physical damage, lowers the armor threshold for both types. But there's also one very important thing that you need to be aware of. Ballistic weapons have a hidden problem. They hit the shield first, which reduces their alpha damage and drops the damage below the needed threshold. So even if the numbers look good on paper, they might fail completely in practice. For example, you have a full Tarantula loadout and you want to damage an F8. On paper, it looks like you should be able to penetrate the armor and do damage to the ship. But when the HP of the shield is at 100%, you don't do damage at all because the shield reduces the damage of the bullet before the impact on the ship itself. So yeah, you have to calculate if you can do damage to a certain ship with a certain ballistic weapon by yourself. So why did I say that heavy fighters are not meta? Well, because armor does not fix the core problems a heavy fighter has. And this is the part most people completely miss or do not understand. Heavy fighters don't lose because they are missing HP, they lose because of missing control over the fight. For example, against a good light fighter pilot, you have the problem that they get very close in your face, sit in your dead zones or at your back, and they just stay there until you're dead. And you cannot turn fast enough because you are slow as fuck. You can't create distance because you're also slow as fuck. And you also cannot disengage because you're slow as fuck. And now you're stuck. And that's it, the fight is over. Ah, yes, and you are also a missile magnet in the persistent universe. So always watch out for that and keep your flares stacked. If you want a full breakdown on why heavy fighters struggle in PvP even with the armor changes and what actually needs to change so they become meta or they are at least a lot better than they are now, you can tell me that in the comments down below and I will make a video just about that topic in the future. So armor does 2 things now. You survive even longer and you become immune to a lot of anti-fighter weapons, which makes heavy fighters a lot better than before, but not meta. Before the patch, I honestly thought that everyone would just switch to either cannons or NDBs. But that didn't actually happen. People, especially in high-skilled environments, are still running anther repeaters or just fast anti-fighter weapons. Which means heavy fighters actually have room to breathe now, especially in group fights. Groups now require anti-light fighter ships and also a dedicated anti-heavy fighter or anti-large ship. For example, that could even be an Asperia Talon because of the size 4 weapons, and which is even better and most likely also preferred by most groups is the L21 Wolf with laser repeaters on the Wolf, because these size 4 weapons have a very high alpha damage threshold and can actually penetrate every heavy fight. Some groups that don't want to use a light fighter as an anti-heavy fighter use also heavy fighters with, for example, cannons, NDBs, high alpha damage repeaters, and so on and so forth. So this is where heavy fighters actually shine even more than before, and that is team fights, especially if your team communicates well, knows target priority, and protects you and stays close close to you because, as I said, you're super slow. If they run away from you, you're just a bad fish dead in the water. And then, if all of that works as intended, you can actually remove all threats to the heavy fighters first. So for example, if you spot the other group running a wolf or another ship that is especially good against you as a fighter and you focus it first and it dies, you now have a flying fortress on the field that deals a shitload of damage but cannot be damaged itself, at least when it doesn't get hit by missiles. That is because missiles also reduce the armor, so always keep your flares stacked, as I said. This system creates something weird though, because it first leads to light fighter frustration. If they cannot break your armor first, they literally cannot win because they cannot damage you. Unless they use, as I said, missiles or specific loadouts like a wolf with the laser gatlings and so on and so forth. For example, I actually cannot, for the love of God, get duels in free flight now when I'm flying a heavy fighter, because most people duel in Panther repeaters, which cannot damage any heavy fighter at all. So I'm just stuck there and they would have to change their whole loadout just to be able to damage me. But this also leads to heavy fighter frustration because, as I said, you don't get any duels now in a heavy fighter because people cannot actually damage you. But also, if you are in a situation in the persistent universe and you have an enemy that has a loadout that cannot do damage to you, but they manage to stick right behind your back or in a dead zone where you also cannot damage them and you also cannot get out of the situation because the light fighter pilot is very good, you're just in a forced draw because they cannot do damage to you, you cannot do damage to them. Yeah, good fucking luck. And also, a lot of people just disengage, they don't fight you. As I said, also in Arena Commander, they don't fight you. Even in squadron battles, they just ignore you. So heavy fighters are still missing something to force pressure on people, which they do not have. So in the end, nobody wins somehow. But then there's also the case, for example, for the Talon or the Wolf. So if a fighter like the Wolf or Talon enters the fight, armor becomes irrelevant again, and the heavy fighter gets still fisted to death like it was fisted before, because the weapons of the Wolf, the laser weapons, especially the Gatlings only when the shields are stripped before they do damage to you. Also, the Talon with Rhino repeaters have the needed threshold to do damage, so they just force you into a raid fight and you die, or just stay close and then you die, or you have to nav out, get a lot of damage in. Then your armor is broken enough that also other people can now damage you and all these things, and then the heavy fighter becomes useless again. So the final conclusion is that heavy fighters are much better than before, more situationally powerful than before, and very strong in coordinated groups. But they're still not meta, because their core weaknesses remain: low maneuverability, low speed, and lack of disengagement tools. What armor really does is this: you can't just hunt heavy fighters anymore with any random loadout. You actually have to plan for a heavy fighter, build your build correctly or fly the correct ship, and also play around them in group fights. And that alone makes them much more dangerous than before, especially if you fly in the PU, because a lot of people in the PU do not know how to counter a heavy fighter in a light fighter or also in a medium fighter, which makes them even stronger in the PU because you are not engaging in fights that have the super hardcore sweats of the game in it. And if you don't want to learn how to actually fly a heavy fighter and dominate PvP, then you can click here.